This week we'll be finishing Chapter 12, Experiments with More Than One Independent Variable. This is the second part of this chapter, where we'll discuss the last two sections on Chapter 12. So to quickly review, last week we went over a brief review of experiments with only one independent variable, and then began to discuss how we can expand on those types of experiments and include two independent variables at the same time. We talked about how with two independent variables, we use what's known as a factorial design, and need to look for two main effects and one interaction effect. Finally, I presented a list of the 8 possible outcomes a 2x2 factorial design could result in. This week, we'll continue the discussion of factorial designs and talk about different factorial variations. We'll also look at how you can identify factorial designs in your readings. Next, we're going to talk about some variations that can exist in factorial designs. We'll discuss variations such as having an independent variable with more than 2 levels, having an independent variable that is a within groups variable, or even adding a third independent variable altogether. Remember that in an independent groups factorial design, also known as between subjects factorial, both independent variables are manipulated between groups. If the design is a 2x2, there are 4 different groups of participants, each undergoing some different variation of the experiment. For example, if you wanted 50 participants in each cell or condition, then you would need 200 total participants, 50 in each of the 4 groups. In within groups factorial designs, also known as repeated measures factorial designs, both independent variables are manipulated within groups. Thus, if you have a 2x2 within groups design, there's only one group of participants, but they participate in all 4 groups or cells, one at a time. For example, if you wanted 50 participants in each cell or condition, you'd only need 50 total participants, because each of those 50 people would be in each of the 4 conditions. The figure shows how many participants a researcher would need to obtain 12 observations per cell in each of the 3 types of designs. Notice that each different participant is labeled with their own participant number. Independent group designs require the largest number of total participants for the study, since each condition uses unique people, whereas within groups designs are most efficient in terms of the number of participants needed, since they only require a total of 12 participants who complete all the conditions. You can also see that a mixed design, which we'll discuss in more detail, is a mix between these 2 design types, where one independent variable is measured as a between subjects variable, and the other is measured as a within subjects variable. This method requires a moderate number of participants compared to both other methods. So let's talk about this mixed factorial design. Mixed factorial designs are a combination of independent groups designs and within group designs. One independent variable is manipulated as independent groups, and the other independent variable is manipulated within groups. In a 2x2 mixed factorial design with 50 people in each cell, you would need 100 participants total, which is twice as many participants as a within groups design and half as many participants as an independent groups design. There are many reasons why you might choose to use this design method. Perhaps you want to reduce the number of participants you need from a completely between subjects design, yet you also don't want each participant to have to sit through 4 different conditions, as they might get tedious or induce carryover effects from condition to condition. So you decide to go with a mix of the 2 in order to minimize the cons of each method while also maximizing the pros. Researchers can also add more levels to their independent variables. Suppose that Strayer and Drews decided to turn their 2x2 factorial design on cell phone use and driving into a 2x3 factorial design by adding a third level to the cell phone condition independent variable, perhaps by having a handheld cell phone, hands-free cell phone, and no phone at all condition. This would change the number of cells from 4 in a 2x2 to 6 in a 2x3. You can see this depicted in the top figure. Factorials are notated like this, or like this. The number of blanks tell you the number of independent variables, and the numbers that you put in those blank cells tell you the number of levels of each of those independent variables. Suppose that Strayer and Drews increase the number of levels on their age variable from 2 to 4. Now it is a 3 cell phone condition by 4 age factorial design. This is presented in the bottom figure. There are 12 total cells, making it a 3 by 4 factorial design. Again, notice that since there are still only 2 independent variables, there are still only 2 blank spaces, but the number in them corresponds to the number of levels each variable has. The 3 corresponding to the variable levels in yellow, and the 4 corresponding to the variable levels in blue. Here, main effects can still be calculated by using marginal means and seeing whether they are different. Interactions are most easily detected with a line graph to see whether the lines are parallel. In both cases though, statistical tests would still need to be performed to determine if the main effects and interactions are in fact statistically significant. Sometimes more than 2 independent variables are needed. For example, suppose Strayer and Drews decided to add a third independent variable, such as traffic condition, and suppose this had 2 levels, dense traffic and light traffic. So now we have a 2 age by 2 cell phone condition by 2 traffic condition factorial design. It's also called a 3-way design because there are 3 independent variables. This also means that there would be 8 cells, 2 times 2 times 2. If you look at the table, you can see that the best way to represent a 3-way design is to create the 2 by 2 table twice, once for each level of the third independent variable, or here traffic condition. In order to graph the 3-way design, you would do the same thing by having 2 graphs side by side, one for heavy traffic and one for light traffic. It may also be helpful to think of this as a third dimension to your variable conditions, such that the newly added third variable extends your table out in a third dimension. However, thinking about it in terms of a second table and graph is perfectly reasonable as well. When there are 3 independent variables, as in a 2 by 2 by 2 factorial design, there will be 3 main effects to test. Remember that main effects are a simple overall difference that examine the effect of one independent variable averaged across the other 2 independent variables. The table examines 3 main effects within the cell phone study: cell phone condition, driver age, and traffic condition. Drivers brake more slowly in the cell phone condition than in the control condition. Older drivers brake more slowly than younger drivers, and drivers are slower to brake in heavy traffic than they are in light traffic. Thus, there are main effects for all 3 independent variables: cell phone condition, driver age, and traffic condition. In a 3-way design, there are 3 possible 2-way interactions: age by traffic condition, age by cell phone condition, and cell phone condition by traffic condition. To examine each of these 2-way interactions, you would make 3 2 by 2 tables, shown in the figure here. After computing the means, you can look at the difference in differences. However, it's probably easier to graph the interaction and look for non-parallel lines. We can see in these example graphs that there are no 2-way interactions present. However, they should still be followed up by statistical tests to look for statistical significance. In the cell phone study, there is also one 3-way interaction. This 3-way interaction is driver age by cell phone condition by traffic condition. If the 3-way interaction is significant, then it means that the 2-way interaction between 2 of the independent variables depends on the level of the third independent variable. The difference in differences is different. It's easiest to look at 3-way interactions by looking at line graphs. In the top graph, there is not a 3-way interaction, because there is no 2-way interaction on the left and no 2-way interaction on the right. In the bottom graph, however, there is a 3-way interaction, because there is a crossing interaction on the left and a spreading interaction on the right. The 2 sides show different 2-way interactions, so there is a 3-way interaction present. Again, here we can look at the 2 graphs to determine if there is a 3-way interaction present. Once again, there is no 3-way interaction present in the top graph, since each 2-way interaction is the same. So although there are 2-way interactions present here, since they are the same at both levels of the third independent variable, then no 3-way interaction exists. However, we can see that there is a 3-way interaction present on the bottom graph. If you look closely, you can see that the 2-way interactions are actually opposite from one another in the bottom graph. Since these change or are different at the two levels of our third independent variable, traffic level, then there is a three-way interaction present. You may be asking yourself, what is the point of all these interactions? Or why do we even need to bother focusing on them when the main effects are giving me clear and concise information on what a variable is affecting? Well, it's important to remember what I said last lecture, that often when there is an interaction effect, it's the most interesting finding to look at. And it turns out that most findings in psychological studies are actually interaction effects. Think about it once again in terms of the Strayer and Drew's driving study. Perhaps talking on the phone had no main effect when performed with solely undergraduate students. However, there was a significant interaction of talking on the phone with driver age. We wouldn't want to conclude from a study that talking on the phone had no effect simply because we didn't see it in our college-age students, because then our research findings could go on to provide inaccurate information for older drivers who may think that they're perfectly fine to talk on the phone and drive as well, yet could result in them getting into more motor accidents. This is also why careful and thoughtful research design planning is important. You have to think ahead on what variables you should be including to anticipate what could result in an interaction being found. It's also important to be able to recognize an interaction effect when you're reading about research. There are certain clues that will let you recognize a factorial design when you're reading a scholarly journal article or a popular press article, which can then alert you to look out for any significant interactions. In the methods section of a scholarly journal article, you will find information about the design of the study. One clue that you're reading about a factorial design is that you'll see a mention of a 4x2 design, a 3x2x3 design, and so forth. Again, remember that these numbers tell you the number of independent variables in the study and the number of levels in each of those independent variables. You might read the word significant or see the notation p is less than 0.05 to let you know that a main effect or interaction is significant. You may also read about an ANOVA, a MANOVA, or F-test being conducted to examine main effects and interactions. Popular press articles usually don't specify what kind of design was used because journalists are trying to make the research simpler so it can be understood by the general public. Thus, there are different clues you'll look for when reading a popular press article. One such clue is looking for the phrase, "it depends," or "only when," to describe an interaction. For example, driving ability while talking on a cell phone depended on the age of the driver. Another such clue is looking for participant variables such as age, gender, or ethnicity. The participant variable might moderate another independent variable. And when there's a moderator, you know that there's an interaction, and that a factorial design was used. For example, reading a research result such as, older adults took longer to brake when talking on a cell phone, whereas younger adults did not show a decrease in driving ability. So let's wrap up this week's topics. This week we finished discussing Chapter 12. Specifically, we discussed some of the variations that we can see to simple factorial designs. We talked about strictly between subjects designs, strictly within subjects designs, as well as a mixed design and how that uses both within and between subjects variables. We also discussed some of the benefits and drawbacks to each, especially in terms of the number of participants required for each design type. We also discussed what happens when we increase the overall number of independent variables in a study beyond 2. Specifically, the inclusion of the three-way interaction and how to detect the presence of such an interaction. Finally, we talked about the importance of interaction effects and how to be on the lookout for and identify interaction effects when reading about research.